So, looking at the perks of Dead by Daylight, I think it's probably most important to identify what makes perks good and bad. I feel like doing another perk analysis video right now because I am working on some killer information, doing some more stat breaking down. But I want to compare the different types of perks because there really are 5 types of perks in the game. So obviously what you have are your meta perks, which is like barbecue and chili, which, you know, you'll see these in most of your killer builds. You'll have your good perks. This is subjective. But your good perks are things that most people will generally agree are good, but there's some form of a drawback to it. This is something like Devour Hope. Then you have your situational perks. These are perks that not a lot of people, you know, your high red rank killers will say that these perks are completely worthless. Your mid-tier killers are going to say that these perks are solid, and your low tiers, well, they're going to be all over the place. But basically, these are perks that, you know, they work. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, or they're very situational. I would say a great example of a mid-tier perk is Knockout. Knockout is a good mid-tier. It's a very situational perk. It's a situational killer perk. It's a situational playstyle perk. And it's a situational playstyle in-game perk. So it fits into a number of those. Then you have your perks that are just shit, where the value that you may get out of them is outweighed by how they are to activate. This is something like Chlorophobia, where in theory these perks should work great. In practice they simply do not. And then you just simply have the dog shit perks that, like Zanchin Tactics, where it's either a beginner perk that as soon as you get enough knowledge in the game becomes useless to you, or it's a perk that simply just has no value. And like looking at some of the perks, like what defines each role, I kind of want to like talk about that, because most of the reason why Killer has such few perks that are run, like think about most of the Killer perks that you see. You see Nurses, you see Barbecue, sometimes you see Bitter, but not necessarily a high-level play. You see Dying Light, because that's like the only gen slowdown perk in the game right now. You'll see Franklin's, because it pisses survivors off. You'll see Devour, because people want to run Devour. You see Haunted, because it's the strongest of the Hex Totems. You see Noed, because there's no drawback to not running it. Sometimes you'll see Ruin. Again, that's a meh. Infectious is another one that people say is strong. I'm going to argue with you on that one. That's another one. Make Your Choice is another universal one you'll pretty much see. Monitor is another one you'll see. Nemesis is a situational. You can put it in there. Pop's another one you're going to see in there. Thana's a situational. Surveillance is a situational. They're kind of on the outside looking in from high tier. You'll see some Thrilling Tremors. It's on the outside looking in. Whispers is definitely up there. Discordance is definitely up there. Enduring is definitely up there. Bamboozle and Corrupt are kind of on the outside, looking in again, just trying to peek their way in. I'm All Ears is incredibly underrated, trying to peek its way in. And then obviously you've got Sloppy, which is up there. So, why are these perks so good? Just picking that handful right now, that's probably A and B tier. Why are those perks so good? Well, Sloppy is just the best healing slowdown in the game. You hit a survivor with an M1, they have a massive healing speed penalty. They get mangled, 25% heal. What really makes this important is when you know how long it takes a survivor to heal. So it's 16 seconds by default with a med kit or another survivor healing them, and it's 32 seconds with self-care. So if you're running into a self-care gamer, it takes longer to heal them. If you're a med kit gamer, you're gonna burn up your med kit faster. That's why this perk is just so good. If you look at the other more inferior ones, like Chlorophobia, because Chlorophobia is a stronger healing penalty, but the activation cost is a lot greater. It only works in the terror radius. And now most survivors are not going to heal in the terror radius because of another meta perk in Nurse's Calling. So, and if you're running Sloppy, most people are going to assume you're running Nurses. So, if you're running Chlorophobia with Sloppy, while that is great and they're not going to heal, there's no value. In addition, Chlorophobia is a situational perk because it requires large terror radius killers. It doesn't work on stealth killers. Okay? I've seen Ghostface run Chlorophobia, so 50% of the game when he's in his power, it's useless. And the other 50% when he's not in his power, I'm going to fear the nurses more than I am Chlorophobia. I'm not healing in terror radius. Period. So, that's a situation of how some perks are just far and away superior. Well, what about a different situation? So we have Thrilling Tremors, which is universally considered to be a decent perk, at the very least. You're not going to find a lot of killers mains out there that sit there and shit on Thrilling Tremors and say, Thrilling Tremors is such a bad perk, oh my god, this perk is... Oh, they're either, like, indifferent towards it, where they say it's, like, it's a meh, or a situational perk, or they're going to say, oh, no, that's a good perk, I run that. Well, if you compare this to Dead Man's Switch, which most killer mains are going to say is a bad perk, maybe a situational perk. Why is that? Well, look at the activation cost in this cost. So Thrilling Tremors blocks gens that aren't being worked on whenever you pick up a survivor. So, over the course of natural gameplay, hitting, downing, picking up, hooking survivors, you will earn this. And it works on all the survivors, as long as it's off cooldown. And it blocks any gens that aren't being worked on. So this does two things. This prevents survivors from completing generators that they were not already actively working on when they picked up a survivor. And it lets you, the killer, know what generators are being worked on. So it works very similar to another crutch perk, another meta perk in Barbecue and Chili. Because Barbecue and Chili works, lets you see the auras of survivors if they're further than 40 meters away. So generally as a killer, if you're playing around a non-campy tunnely type play, or if you're just trying to follow the quote-unquote survivor rulebook, generally what you're going to do is you're going to hook a survivor, you're going to use Barbecue, you're going to see there's people working on a gen over there, you're going to go chase them off. Map pressure. At least M1 killer map pressure. Because that's most M1 killers. Right there. That's how most play. Well, Thrilling Tremors lets you see, oh, this generator over here is not blocked and it's within the 40 meters. I can go over there and chase them off, so I don't have to run the 40 meters away where Barbecue shows me. I don't have to waste all my time going over there. And mind you, this is important for another perk, Trail of Torment. Trail of Torment makes it so that you get undetectable for 16 seconds. Well, how far can you as a walking killer travel in 16 seconds? It's usually a little bit more than 70 meters. So to put that into perspective, if you were to use Trail of Torment and Barbecue to try and sneak up on survivors, you would waste over half of your ability just getting into Barbecue range. Half of your duration, I should say, of Trail of Torment just getting into Barbecue range to chase them off. Which is why Trail of Torment's not as effective as some of the other stealth perks in the game. And you look at Thrilling Tremors, well, Thrilling Tremors is significantly strong because it does two things. Well, what does Dead Man's Switch do? Dead Man's Switch doesn't do that. So Dead Man's Switch works in the same way, and you achieve it over the course of normal gameplay. Hitting, downing, picking up, hooking survivors. However, it only works on one survivor, the Obsession. So that limits its effectiveness right there. So that's number one. So you got Thrilling, now we got Dead Man's. Then the second problem is it needs the survivors to activate it. Now, Thrilling is like a great informational thing at the very least, even if you're not trying to block gens. It's just great for information, because most survivors won't know it unless they happen to be walking up to a generator and they're about to start on it, and then you pick somebody up and it pops in their face, and it's like, oh, he has Thrilling Tremors. And most survivors aren't going to, like, change their style of gameplay. Most survivors are not just going to, like, get off a generator that's 99% so it stays blocked and the killer doesn't think you're over there. That's not really something a lot of survivors will do, so let's start with that. But what is Dead Man's Switch's problem? Well, it only works if the survivor gets off the gen. Well, if you're playing with 4 random survivors that don't know each other, what are the chances that all 3 people are working on a gen, all 3 people have the generator at like 80, their gen at 85%, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna get off the generator and go save that guy. No. This is like a survive with friends counter, which there's better options to that. Another case that people make for calling perks mid-tier is perks that have low value. Like, for example, all of the hexes, except for Noed and Haunted Ground, are considered weak, for the most part. They're at least on the weaker side. Like, Noed and Haunted are the 2 universal ones. Because if you run Haunted by itself, survivors will think, oh, it's a different hex totem. They'll pop it, and you get a limited window to do something. Maybe not worth a perk slot, but Haunted's still strong. And if you run it with another hex perk, well, then it makes it even stronger, because you're like, oh, they're like, oh, I'm gonna pop this other hex perk you have, and you wind up protecting that perk with Haunted. Or they just cleanse the other perk and don't give a shit about Haunted. But even Haunted is a bit situational. If they pop it in the beginning of the game, get out the way early, or if they pop it and you can't find anybody in that 60 seconds, well, then the perk has no value. And Haunted does not work well if they're already all injured. If all 4 survivors are injured, or at least the survivor you're chasing is injured, then Haunted really has no value, and it's basically like a waste of a perk slot. You know, you have something like Noed, which, yes, the survivors can cleanse it, but how many survivor groups do you know go out and cleanse dull totems? Noed's that ultimate fuck you at the end of a game. It's either a way to secure 1 or 2 more kills if you're a shitty killer. It's a way to ice an already solid victory if you're a good killer. And if you're somewhere in between, Noed's just there to say fuck you to everybody and make them think you're a better killer. So there's no downside to running that. But what about something like Devour? Devour is really strong. It's infinite Mori if you can get the stacks. It's infinite exposed effect if you can get the stacks. Well, Devour has 2 problems. Well, first off, it requires you, the killer, to do something. You need to hook survivors, which achieved over normal gameplay, and then run away and hope now that the survivors do their end of the bargain, which is then unhook that survivor. Well, you know what the problem with that is? That requires both you, the killer, and the 4 survivors to do both ends of the equation while not having the totem cleanse. But why is Devour looked upon as this great perk compared to something like, say, Huntress Lullaby? Because, well, what's the difference? The survivors have no control over Devour Hope. When you get 3 tokens, they're fucked. When you get 5 tokens, they're fucked. Their only option is to cleanse the totem. Look at something like Huntress Lullaby. Huntress Lullaby just removes the skill check notification. The regression penalty is nice if they fuck up a skill check. But again, this entire perk is revolved around survivors missing skill checks. If you're a good survivor and you can hit skill checks with no warning, because, you know, you actually look at the screen, then this perk has no value to you as a killer. It's just good for flushing out who's not paying attention or who's a noob. But this leads me to the other thing. Well, certain perks that are unilaterally considered low tier to just dog shit, how are they sometimes run in a successful way? I'm not just talking about meme builds, because trust me, running 3rd seal and knockout is a great meme build, okay? Running overwhelming presence and Franklin's is a great meme build. Running Nemesis and Rancor is a great meme build. We're not talking about meme builds though. How do certain killers get value out of weirdly situational type perks? So a great example of how some killers can get value is in the case of like agitation on the nurse. The nurse is actually gets a boost of speed when they pick up and carry a survivor, believe it or not. Okay, a walking nurse is 90% movement speed. A nurse carrying someone is 91% movement speed. And if you put on agitation, that means you will actually move faster as a walking nurse carrying a survivor than you will, well, as a walking nurse. Another situation of a killer that gets good value out of perks is in the case of the doctor. The doctor most especially gets value out of a number of perks that you may not otherwise see value in, mostly skill check and terror radius. The doctor gets value out of distressing. increasing his terror radius to increase static blast. The Doctor gets increased value out of Huntress Lullaby, because it stacks with his power. The Doctor gets increased value out of Overcharge. Yes, it is his perk, but it still works amazingly effective with him. The Doctor is the only killer that can get value out of Unnerving Presence at that. Like, literally, this perk is a blessing to most survivors if they can hit skill checks, because it increases your chance of hitting a great skill check. By reducing the skill check zone from this to this, but the great skill check stays the same, you're more likely to hit the great skill check if you're just trying to hit a skill check in general. And there are other killers that can get unique value out of perks. So any killer that can destroy a pallet without physically breaking it, such as Hillbilly, Leatherface, Demogorgon, gets more value out of Spirit Fury, because they can use their power in addition to their normal break animation in order to get rid of pallets, making this perk easier to activate. Another good example would obviously be the Huntress with Iron Maiden. She's the only killer that should run Iron Maiden, unless you're in a meme build, because she needs to open lockers faster to reload. This does that, in addition to giving her a secondary effect. Although that secondary effect is pretty weak. So, certain perks in the game that are considered bad, oh, you shouldn't run that, may have a certain situation where they gain extra value. A great example of this is Thanatophobia. Thanatophobia is actually a very strong perk, but most killer mains will look at it and say it is mediocre at best. Thanatophobia makes it so that survivors who are injured, dying, or hooked will cause the remaining survivors to have healing and repair speed penalties. Well, the heal speed penalty isn't the big deal, because that's what Sloppy is for. So, this is mostly just to slow repairs. But why this perk is strong? Because of the killers that can use it. That's what you really need to decide when you're looking at perks. So, killers that can keep survivors injured for long durations of time are the Legion and the Plague. These are the two killers in the game that can keep survivors injured the longest out of all the killers in the game. Therefore, maybe the Doctor, if they can't snap out of it. But just by default, Legion's power and Plague's power lend themselves to being easier to use with Thanatophobia. So this is a better perk to run on those two killers. They're both able to keep survivors injured for long durations. In a similar aspect, most of your mobility-based killers actually get a lot more value out of other perks in the game. So, mobility-based killers will get good value out of Tinker, whereas an M1 killer isn't necessarily going to get value. Billy and Nurse have the ability to instantly go over to where the generator is being repaired, whereas a Wraith may have to slowly walk over there. In addition, while Enduring is a very strong perk for most killers in the game, because most killers have to deal with pallets, killers that can avoid pallets altogether don't have this problem. The Huntress, the Nurse, the Executioner. Those are like the first three things that come to mind in killers who avoid pallets. In similar respect, Bamboozle is another perk that, while strong, most killers don't need. Huntress, Nurse, Deathslinger, I got a mix, sorry, don't need Bamboozle, because their power negates that advantage that survivors have. Some perks that are considered mid-tier or low tier are also because they are situational in helping you, so that it determines whether or not you need the perk slot. For example, Deerstalker reveals auras of survivors that you slug. Well, if you don't slug survivors, this perk has no value. In addition, you don't necessarily need this perk to find survivors you slug. Enduring is another great example. If you're a high-level killer that is looping and looping and looping and looping and looping and looping and looping, and so they're not eating stuns, why would you bring Enduring? For the one time that you do get stunned? You know, Iron Grasp is great, but if you know where the hook is and you're not afraid of body blocking, why would you bring Iron Grasp? Same situation for Agitation. Well, if you're not breaking pallets, why are you running Brutal Strength? Yes, the only benefit you get is breaking generators, but certain killers don't even need to do that. Like, if I'm a Nurse, I don't need to bring this. So the killer that you play can very wildly affect what perks are good or bad, in the same way that the killer that you play also affects the map that you choose to play. For example, one of the most survivor-friendly maps in the game is Rotten Fields. This is, by far, of all the Cold Winds, considered to be the most survivor-friendly map. But this is the Hillbilly's best map. Period. Another similar situation is maps that are generally loathed by both sides unless you're in a specific situation. Meatpacking is considered to be both a bad killer and survivor map, yet stealth killers will get more value out of this, not to mention experienced survivors who know the map will know the loops inside and out, like myself. Therefore, there is no reason to fear this map whatsoever. So, when it comes to determining how a perk is good or bad, you shouldn't necessarily sum it up as, oh, this is big bad all across board. You should more look at the killer that you're trying to put it on first. This is a great way to determine how good or bad a perk may actually be. And certain perks that are situational may shine brighter than others. Think about this. I run Blood Echo while going for Adept Oni, and I get so much value out of this perk, I think it's a good perk. Consequently, I then bring this perk onto a different killer, for example, the Wraith, but because every survivor is healing against me, because I'm not able to apply enough pressure, because I'm playing the Wraith, this perk sees little value. Does that mean that Blood Echo is a good perk because it works on Oni, or a bad perk because it doesn't work on Wraith? You have to slide the scale when it comes to determining the value of the perk. In addition, perks that are universally considered good are also being phased out little by little. A great example is looking at Barbecue. Well, Barbecue and Chili is the universal killer perk, you would say, except not for the Executioner, because he uses cages half the time. So why would I run Barbecue and Chili on that killer? Except for the blood points, which I'm not getting. Nurses is a great perk to run, you say, but not on the Plague, because survivors aren't healing against her power. They're cleansing, so they're not actually healing, because they're infected. You know, another great meta perk is Infectious Fright. It works on all killers, except survivors aren't in your terror radius. If they're all spread out, this perk doesn't give you value. Noed, I will confidently say, Noed is the only perk in the game that all killers will benefit from. But that's also because Noed is the backup. Every killer can get benefit out of Franklin's. Well, not if I'm a hatchet-only huntress. But then again, you're not getting the benefit out of Noed, one would say. Well, no, I get the movement speed bonus. The thing that most people don't realize is most perks in the game force you to choose around your power as well. And this is an interesting case as to why Sloppy Butcher, which is considered to be the premium anti-heal perk in the game, is actually not effective on the Legion, compared specifically to Thanatophobia. The Legion uses their power, they hit multiple survivors, injuring multiple survivors at once. Thanatophobia acts if the survivors are injured, period. Whereas Sloppy only acts if you hit the survivor with a basic attack. Well, the Legion's power isn't a basic attack. This means that the Legion is not able to get as much value out of Sloppy Butcher as the Wraith. Whereas the Legion gets more value out of Thana than the Wraith. It's an interesting comparison about how two perks can change the situation of two characters. A Wraith versus Sloppy and a Legion versus Thana actually will make the Legion stronger than the Wraith, a situation that may not otherwise occur. In a similar situation, look at a killer such as Hillbilly. Hillbilly with I'm All Ears becomes better than Nurse with Whispers. Why? Well, because even though Nurse's power is better than Billy's perk makes up for that weakness by letting him know exactly where the survivor is going after the vault. Whereas, for the Nurse, Whispers is just active. This means that when the survivor rounds the corner out of line of sight, the Nurse with Whispers has to guess where they went, and the Billy with I'm All Ears knows exactly where they go. That does not mean that Whispers is a better perk than I'm All Ears is. I'm All Ears is more situational and cooldown based. Whispers is always active but requires more knowledge. So, the next time you see an argument online about which killer is better, which perk is better, which map is better, take into consideration that the perk and killer balance, I will say, can greatly affect how one person judges certain perks.